In today's video, I am going to be breaking down 5 reasons why combat athletes should never lift weights. This information is going to be career changing, so stay tuned. What is good? It's Coach Adam with Counter-Strike, where we make fight science simple. On this channel, we break down everything that combat athletes need to know about strength, conditioning, and nutrition so they can dominate on the mats or in the cage. If you're new to the channel, please make sure you subscribe. In today's video, it's going to be a big one. We're talking about why combat athletes should never lift weights. This is a really controversial topic in the combat sports world. Some athletes and coaches say fighters should lift. Some athletes and coaches say fighters should never lift. It's very confusing. We don't know what to believe. I'm going to break it down. This is going to be the definitive guide on if combat athletes should lift or not. So if you're excited, if you're ready to level up your game, make sure you hit that like button and make sure you also stick around until the end. I got a special surprise for all my combat athletes out there, something that you can start doing today that's going to help you win more fights and dominate on the mats or in the cage. So let's jump right into it. Reason number 1 a combat athlete should never lift weights is if they want to have devastating knockout power. Let's bring it back to physics class for a second. What is power? Science tells us that power is the product of force times velocity. So if we understand that power is the product of force times velocity, and we also understand that to have more knockout power, we have to increase how much force we can produce, and we have to increase our velocity. How do we do this? Lifting weights is an incredible way to produce more force and to have more velocity. How do we produce more force? Well, this simply comes by getting stronger. When combat athletes do compound movements like the squat, the deadlift, and the bench, and they do it really heavy, like 85 to even close to 100% of their 1 rep max, this teaches fighters how to produce more force. If a fighter can produce more force, they can become more powerful, which means they can knock out more opponents. How do we then increase our velocity? Velocity is simply just distance over time, or how quickly we can move from point A to point B. Some incredible ways to improve our velocity in the weight room is by doing things like ballistic movements like med ball throws, Olympic movements like clean variations, weighted plyometrics like dumbbell jumping, by moving a moderate to light amount of weight as quickly as possible. This teaches combat athletes how to improve their velocity. So by lifting heavy things, we produce more force, and by lifting moderate things as quickly as possible, we increase our velocity, which allows us to knock out more opponents. If you are a fighter that does not want to have devastating knockout power, does not want to finish their opponents and make a statement, then I highly recommend avoiding weightlifting. Reason number 2 a combat athlete should never lift weights is if they want to be injured all the time. If you're a fighter that loves struggling with injury, that loves sitting out from class and training because you're hurt, that loves pulling out of fights because you have injuries in the middle of camp, then you should definitely avoid weightlifting. Everybody knows that weak things break. So when we, let's say, get taken down and we fall wrong, or maybe we get put in a submission, maybe we get hit at a weird angle with a lot of force, more times than not, an athlete gets hurt because they're just not strong enough to withstand the forces that are being impacted on their body. When combat athletes lift heavy things, they don't just learn how to produce more force, but they also learn how to absorb more force. So if we can produce force, then we can absorb force, and then when we get in situations that may injure us in training, we are much less likely to get hurt and get injured because our body is used to producing and absorbing large amounts of force through various different ranges of motion. This is why the strongest fighters are usually the fighters that get injured the least. So if you're a combat athlete that wants to get injured all the time, that wants to pull out of fights, that wants to miss training, that wants to be really frustrated because they're hurt, then I highly recommend that you do not lift weights. Reason number 3 a combat athlete should never lift weights is if they want to struggle with the weight cutting process. The research shows that it is much easier to cut weight when we pull water from muscle rather than trying to diet and burn fat. The dieting process is super stressful on the body. It takes a long time, especially when we're in fight camp where our training demands are at the highest. The last thing we want to do is be in a severely calorie restricted state to cut weight. This is going to make it really difficult to perform and even more difficult to recover from the high intensity and high demands of training. But if we have more muscle, then we don't have to worry about dieting in camp. The week of the fight, we can just go through a water load and a dehydration process to efficiently pull water out of our muscle, which is going to be a much less stressful way of making weight. Remember, it's not just about making weight, it's about doing it with as little stress as possible. So how do we build more muscle? Simply by lifting weights. Hypertrophy training specifically. Now, it's very important that we don't just blow up like a bodybuilder, because if we get too heavy, then it's going to be even more difficult to lose weight. We have to make sure that we stay within 12 to 16% of our fight weight. However, if we can build a lot of muscle within that 12 to 16% of our fight weight, not only are we going to have more potential to actually finish our opponents and be more athletic, it's also going to be much easier to pull the water out of that muscle and cut weight without stress. So if you're a fighter that wants a stress-filled weight cut, that wants to struggle to make weight, then you probably should avoid weightlifting and you should probably have no muscle on your body. The 4th reason a fighter should avoid lifting weights is if they never want to be feared by their opponents. We all have those training partners in the gym that are just jacked and strong. They get a hold of you, you can't break their grip. You're going to roll, you're going to spar with them, and your heart starts to beat just a little bit faster. We've all seen those standoffs where one guy is jacked, has a ton of muscle, the other guy is looking scrawny. Now, obviously in combat sports, muscle and strength isn't everything. You can have someone that's super jacked and super strong, but if their skill is terrible, they're not gonna go very far. However, when you have 2 athletes that are at the same skill level, the stronger athlete is going to win more times than not. The other side of that is, we all know this, winning fights is a mental game. So if you look more physically imposing than your opponent, if you have a record of just mauling through guys and having insane strength without fatiguing and getting tired, then you're going to live in your opponent's head rent-free. They are going to be having nightmares about your strength because of just how you look and what you've done in the past and throughout your career. If you don't want to have that edge, if you don't want to be intimidating and impose fear and threat on your opponent, then I highly recommend not weightlifting, staying skinny and weak, and giving it your best shot from there. 5th and final reason a combat athlete should never lift weights is if they do not want to be athletic. One of the greatest benefits of lifting weights is improving movement quality and athleticism. There are a lot of ways that we go about improving our athleticism by increasing our mobility or our coordination. We can also improve something called proprioception, or basically how our body moves through space. Let's say I close my eyes. I can't see anything, but I know that this is the arm of my chair. I know that this is my belt and my shelf is right behind that. I know this because of proprioception. When my eyes are closed, I still have an awareness of the space around me and how my body moves through that space. When we lift weights, let's say we're squatting really heavy, we learn much more about our body. We understand how our body moves through space. We have more control over our body. And this is really important when it comes to fighting, because in a fight, we have to make split-second decisions. There is so much sensory information coming into us. Our opponent, how they're moving, how we're moving, where we're looking, where they're looking, our corner, their corner, the lights, the crowd. A fighter has to be able to make high-level decisions in a split second. A wrong decision could be the difference between them dominating a fight and getting finished very quickly. By improving our athleticism, our coordination, our mobility, our proprioception in the weight room, this actually improves how efficiently we move when we're in the cage. This means we can make decisions much quicker, which means we're going to have an edge over our opponent and increase our chances of winning. So if you don't want to be more athletic, if you don't want to increase your chances of winning fights, then you should definitely avoid weightlifting. There you have it, my 5 reasons why a combat athlete should never lift weights. If you haven't caught on by now, it's really important for a fighter's success to lift weights in some capacity. This doesn't mean we just start going and lifting like a bodybuilder or a powerlifter or doing CrossFit. It's really important that the weightlifting that we do is specific for the sport that we practice. We're fighters, so we have to lift like fighters. And like I said in the beginning of the video, I know there's a ton of just confusing information out there on if you should lift or not, or where you should even start. And so I wanted to help you out. I put together an absolutely free 3-week strength and conditioning program. If you've never lifted weights before, or maybe you have a little bit of a background and you're just confused on how to lift as a fighter and you really want to be successful in your fight career, this is a great place to start. It's a 3-week free strength and conditioning program. You can check it out by clicking on the link down in the bio down below. And if you want to learn even more about weightlifting for combat sports, I have a whole playlist somewhere up there of all the videos that I've ever done on lifting. Again, I appreciate you checking out this video. I hope you learned a lot. If you dug it, hit that like button, make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you next time.